The only thing most of us know about Gideon is that some friends of his have put Bibles in hotel and motel rooms all over the world. For some of us, there's also a vague memory of him blowing a trumpet, but that's about all, or at least that's about all for me, until I came upon this story from the book of Judges. It's a story from Israel's ancient past, before the temple in Jerusalem, before King David, before Israel had any kings at all. Gideon was one of Israel's judges, like Deborah and Samson, charismatic leaders who, by the Spirit of God, defended Israel from her enemies and inspired the people with their heroic deeds. Gideon was no hero at first, however. Like the other judges, his abilities came from God, not from him. It took the visit of an angel and a sign from God to get him going. And even then, the angel had to work pretty hard. That's what I like about Gideon, his undisguised queasiness about answering God's call. He wasn't brave. He kept coming up with reasons why not. And he wouldn't budge without a display of divine fireworks. That's why I like him. If Gideon could get with God's program, then anyone can. The story of his call begins in a wine press where he was hiding out from the Midianites. The press was a big vat carved out of a rock in the ground, big enough in this case to thresh wheat. Gideon was down there because every time the Midianites saw something of value, they galloped in on their camels and took it. They were a nomadic tribe who had plagued Israel for generations. This particular trouble had been going on for 7 years. They let the Israelites do all the work, harvesting the grapes, the wheat, the barley, and the olives. Then, when everything was piled neatly in baskets, they swooped in and took it all, killing everyone who got in their way. The general understanding at the time was that God had sanctioned this violence because of Israel's own idolatry. But 7 years turned out to be long enough. God sent a parole officer in the form of an angel to show Gideon a way out. Only the initial interview with Gideon didn't go very well. God is with you, you mighty warrior. That's how the angel greeted Gideon, who was in no mood either for flattery or religious talk. But if God is with us, then why has all this happened to us? It was as if the angel had said, "Good morning." And Gideon replied, "What's so good about it?" By his definition, the way you know God is with you is that everything is going well. No starving, no hiding out, no Midianites. Gideon wanted the God he had heard miracle stories about, the God of wonderful deeds who brought Israel up from Egypt. Not this God who stood by while people got robbed and killed. To the angel's credit, he didn't tell Gideon that his people had brought the hurt on themselves. The angel just agreed that it was time for it to stop. And he commissioned Gideon right on the spot. "You do it," he said. "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian," which was not what Gideon had in mind. But I'm weak. I'm least. I'm small. There must be 100 Israelites with better qualifications. I just suggested something ought to be done. I didn't volunteer to do it. Honestly, I'm not the one you want. I'm the least impressive person in my family, which is the weakest link in the whole tribe of Manasseh. But I will be with you, God said. And that was that. Gideon's own qualifications didn't matter. All that mattered was his partnership with God, who doesn't call anybody to do anything without promising to go too. Still, Gideon wanted to make sure it was really God he was dealing with. So he said, "Show me a sign. Show me a sign that it's you." If he had been a character from the New Testament, he might have gotten into trouble for that, because in Christian scripture, people only ask for signs when they don't have faith. But in Hebrew scripture, it's perfectly all right to ask for a sign. In fact, it's even considered a good idea to test the spirits, to make sure that what is calling you does not come from the dark side of the moon or your own imagination. So Gideon did what anyone in his position would have done. He asked for a sign, telling the angel to stay put while he went inside his house to fix a meal. Now, the next part is so arcane that there's no reason any of us should understand it. But what Gideon wanted to know was how the angel would consume the meal. If his visitor simply ate the goat, the gravy, and the bread, wiped his lips and said thank you, then Gideon would know he had a fake on his hands. But if the meal burst into flame and was consumed by fire, then he would know it was God. Don't ask me why it had to happen that way. Maybe that was just how God ate dinner back in those days. When Gideon came struggling out of his house with all that food, the angel told him to pour it all on a rock. And then the whole feast went up in smoke, and the angel vanished from Gideon's sight. Now that is a sign. And what did Gideon do? The sign he had begged for scared him half to death. "Help me, God! I have seen the angel of God face to face." But God said, "Peace. Do not fear. You will not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to God and called it, "The Lord is Peace." You're going to have to read the entire book of Judges to find out the rest of the story. But I'll give you a clue. It was not peaceful for the Midianites. What I want to hold up and ponder is Gideon's legacy to us. Not just his sassiness in the presence of God, nor his queasiness when the angel called his bluff. Those are the important parts of the story because they remind us we don't have to stop being human in order to start being gods. But the real beauty of the story for me is that, well, it's that Gideon became the very sign he asked for. It wasn't the burned up meal on the rock. That sign was for Gideon's benefit alone, so he would know who was calling him. The real sign Gideon wanted was relief for his people, an end to the robbing and the killing, something he could celebrate at that altar called "The Lord is Peace." God granted him the sign he longed for. Only Gideon was the sign. By answering God's call, he would become it. He would not just ask for it, he would be it and do it. And that's a powerful legacy for all of us. All of us who are tired of hiding from the Midianites in our lives, who miss God's wonderful deeds, who ask God to show off by doing something spectacular. My guess is we'd better be careful what we suggest, because there's every chance in the world God will say, "What a splendid idea. I'm all for it. I hereby commission you." But that's what Gideon said. What would we say? Not that it matters, because our qualifications are not important. And besides, God has a but as well. But I will be with you, God says. But I will be with you, God says. And that, as it turns out, is really all we need. It's all we need. Thanks be to God. Amen.